Hello, happy Thanksgiving. I wanted to come on live today because there's so much going on today and there's so much to share. So it's a very big day. We have two things happening on the calendar at once, which is really cool. It's also the first day of the month of Kislev. So I love that the calendar is giving us two on one. So happy Thanksgiving from our home to yours. And also, I just wanted to come on and talk a little bit about the month of Kislev and to focus on what God wants to do in that month and how he has set it apart to it's important that we set it apart and consecrate it for the rest of the month ahead. That's what Rosh Chodesh teaching is about, is doing that with that first day of the month. And I love that it falls on Thanksgiving Day, which is because that's a day that as a nation, we're going to stop and celebrate gratitude, right? And so I love the idea of Rosh Chodesh because God so desires to spend time with us, and he so loves it when we set apart that time, whether we do it on the Sabbath, whether we do it the first day of the month. He desires that time with us. And how powerful is that? He wants to connect with us, and he loves it when we bring that aside to him because he's going to bless the rest of the month, right? So today we're going to talk about the month of Kislev and all that it has within it and all that it represents. And we're also going to talk a lot about this idea of hope. And I'm going to look at that with a different slant. So I'm excited to dive into all of this. So we are in the fall season. This is the season of harvest. And the Bible teaches us so that we will reap what we sow, right? You've heard that. But it's never said in the Bible in a negative way. We have somehow heard that. It's been passed down as you're going to reap what you sow is negative. And can it be? Of course. But the teaching from God's heart is he wants us to be in alignment with him so that we know the timing to plant so that we will reap the harvest. And that is a metaphor for many things in our lives, right? So the teaching is that we will be aligned. That is always God's heart, and his desire is to be aligned. And today the calendars collide and we have two on one. And so it's just very cool and very, very special. And I just wanted to take a minute. I know that Thanksgiving is a day that of gathering, right? It's a day to gather, and it's a day to be grateful and experience the harvest, right? Physically with the food, experience the things that have been growing all season, and now we have this harvest, right? But it's also it can be a hard season as well. It can be a time where I know for me growing up, all of my family got together, and I love that I have family and great friends here in Austin, but I also have family that I'm not able to see. And so there's this mixed bag of that, those things. And I know so many people right now that have experienced tremendous losses, especially over these last couple years, and they're facing the season of holidays without loved ones and without the memories that are connected to that. And so I know that this season, this day in particular, can be a hard day. It can be a time where painful things, sadness, all of those things come up, grief comes up. And I just wanted to encourage you that God, wherever you are today, that I really believe that God wants to meet you there. I really do. I don't think it's a mistake that this is on the day of the month where God really desires, it's a holy day that he desires that connection, and he wants to be with you and be among us. That's his promise. Um, so I think it's a perfect time to talk about this idea of hope and what hope brings up in us, right? And I'm going to speak with a different angle, one that I actually was introduced to recently on this idea and the question of, is hope reasonable? Is it reasonable? Is it reasonable to hope? So, I'm excited because I do want to talk a little bit about the month of Kislev, and I'm going to start there, and then we're going to dig deeper into this hope idea, right? Okay, so it is the month associated with the tribe of Benjamin, and this is really cool. He was the only child born, the only one of the tribes that he was born in the Promised Land. And things happened this month that changed the course of Israel. And I believe that that aligning and that energy is what we are aligning with. It's the spirit of that. It is the ninth of the 12 months in the Jewish calendar, and it is associated with the Hebrew letter Samekh. I don't know if that's one letter, but it is a picture of trust, support, and coming full circle. So it is a month to examine your heart and your motives, to break out of old patterns of mistrust, which goes perfectly in alignment with what we're going to talk about. Because when we're in alignment with patterns of mistrust, it's going to hinder our walk and our connection with God. It's also going to hinder our walk and our connection to the people in our lives, to the relationships. So the name Kislev is derived from the Hebrew word for security and trust. And I declare that this month we will enter into new levels of trust. And with trust comes rest, because rest comes when we're in a trusting posture, right? Don't you feel like you can have peace when you're trusting? When we're anxious and worried, there is no rest, right? There's no soundness inside in our minds. And this month, we are declaring trust and rest. So I ask you to declare that with me, and I declare that over you and over your family. So the tribe of Benjamin was the most gifted tribe in the art of the bow. They were very gifted in this, in they were gifted in so many things, but it's about warfare and developing warfare strategies. So what does that mean? What in the world does that mean? Well, we know we're in a spiritual battle, and it's important that we have strategies for any battle, for anything in life, right? That we have strategies, because that's what gives us revelation, and that's what helps us to be proactive, right? Being on the offense instead of the defense. We want to be proactive. I find it also so interesting to note that we're also, this month is associated with the constellation of Sagittarius, which just happens to be the archer, right? So it is a time to fight against empires and cultures. And isn't that amazing? The fight that is happening right now in our nation against culture and against what the world wants us to live like and what God desires for us to live like, which brings freedom. So, what are your warfare strategies? Well, these are your self care rituals, believe it or not. These are the ways that you protect your heart and mind and align with the truth. It makes me think of the scripture that we take our thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ and the truth, his truth, right? So, what is it that helps your mind and heart connect to God and quiet those voices that are speaking against that, that want to pull you into distrust, into anxiety, and into fear? So you want to develop a strategy. What works for you? What everybody has a different thing that works for them, but something that you want to be consistent in. We talk a lot about compassionate discipline with ourselves, and how do we be consistent in those things, in prayer, in our times with God, in our talking with a trusted friend, someone who is safe, that we can process these things out loud, because we know the power in that. I love to plug into podcasts. I listen all the time. I'm filling my head. I notice the days that if I'm not plugging in, I notice that my mind will start going to the negative. And I read a lot. I read a lot of books, but it's important that we keep up on doing our own self work, because the voices will take over if we're not proactively doing something that brings life and truth into our minds and ultimately our hearts. We have to do that. One of the things that I read that I thought was interesting, because I get a lot of interesting stuff from Chuck Pierce's book, and he said this: God gives us cultural holidays to help us enter our covenant holidays, and that's interesting, right? So this is a day that we get to set aside and regroup. It's a good month to review your support system. Who is supporting you and who are you supporting? And how do you connect with that? How do you make that intentional? Intentional time with someone to pray together, to be able to vent things out and to process through things together. As we enter into this season, it can be very busy. Thanksgiving kicks off, and before you know it, it's Christmas, and we're moving through. These last 2 months go so fast. So it's very easy to shut down, numb out, overindulge. We can overindulge in food and alcohol and spending. The last few years, I have really been treasuring this idea of these months being that hidden time on the Hebrew calendar, right? Because we're already in the new Hebrew year. We've already entered into 5783. So I don't know what it did for my mindset, but it changed these times as this like secret time that I get with God to get me prepared to launch out in the new year instead of going into the new year not feeling like I got to pull myself all together and I've got to start from scratch, like hit the ground running. It's actually helped me to feel very prepared and very ready for that, to step into that. So last month was the month of the flood, and we talked about that. So, what does that mean for this month? This is the month of the rainbow, of the covenantal promise, right? So, it's a time to examine what you have been through this past year to come to a place of peace. And God literally makes a covenant with us so that we won't have to war against those things again. So, whatever you have overcome this year, whatever you have battled with, God is giving you a covenantal promise that you will never have to war in that way again. Wow, how cool is that? I am so excited because we have really, over the last couple years, honed our coaching that we do in the winter, and we do our Thrive Guide coaching. I am super excited to get the new Thrive Guide to you guys. And what we're going to do this year that's different than the coaching that we've done in the last couple years, last 4 years, now we're going to do a 1 day workshop. We're going to do it to hold the date, save the date for January 7th, because that is the day we are going to do an all day workshop. And this is really this idea that it was really the pandemic that helped us discover this, because we realized after 2020, in 2021, we really did a special time of getting complete with the trauma of the year. And we added so much into our Thrive Guide to help us process through the year. And we saw so much value in this. This has now become something that we do. And I love the way that this is talking about it, because we know the power of getting emotionally complete as something is ending in order to really step confidently into the new beginning. So, of course, we're going to do that with the year. So, I'm super excited. We'll be getting more information out about that after this weekend. Enjoy Thanksgiving, and it's my anniversary weekend, so I'm excited about that too. We're going to do a little getaway, and I'm super excited though to be prepared, and especially to have that time with you guys to unpack, to have a safe place, to have trusted confidants and friends that we can process with, that we can feel and grieve and experience, so that we can really step into everything that is going to unfold for us in the next year. So I'm excited about that. Okay, so remember that God's promise, He gave a rainbow promise that whatever you battled with, God is giving you that promise that you will never have to war in that way against it again. So it makes me think of my favorite Psalm 84 when he says, "Blessed are those whose heart is set on pilgrimage, because we will go from strength to strength." And I'm not quoting the whole one, but that the whole psalm, but that is the heart of it, right? It's blessed are those whose heart is set on the journey. It's set on understanding that in the journey we are going to go through the valley of Baca, the valley of tears, but through that we're going to go from strength to strength because everything makes us stronger and more connected, especially when we have healthy ways to process that so that it doesn't go inside and create toxic and bad coping mechanisms, right? We go to strength as each appears before God in Zion. So we know that. So he says, "You have come through the flood and it did not overtake you. You are here." And so he is making a covenant with you and that you will not war against that again. And that's a paraphrased out of Genesis 9:13 through 17, if you want to check that out. So this month is tranquility and peace. And even in the midst of warfare, you will have shalom. You will have a peace that transcends understanding. And David talks about that, about having peace in the midst of conflict. He shares that a lot in his Psalms. So there is a peace when you are stepping into where God is calling you, where the Spirit is guiding you, even if it's difficult, even if it's challenging. There's a peace that comes from that and a rest that comes when you take dominion of your appointed inheritance. We talk about that a lot in here. We love talking about that, about being prepared and being ready to step into our inheritance and to own it, to really own that. Get Inspired started to be the bridge between inspiration and destiny. We want to be the bridge. It's so much more than just being inspired, but inspiration is the spark, right? Where it starts. But we also are here to be the bridge, to walk with you, to be the ones holding the bridge up, right? There's so many ways that that shows up in community. So we're excited. And if you are here, you are someone who wants to live fully alive and in your calling and your destiny. And you've come to understand that your calling is not a destination. It's not that you live for this one thing or time or experience, right? It is a process, like we say, a pilgrimage. And we are incredibly grateful to be in it together. So this is interesting. It's also a month of dreams. And 9 of the 10 dreams mentioned in the Torah happen in the month of Kislev. So it is a month of dreams. So you might find that you're remembering your dreams more. It's a month of visions also. And God speaks through dreams. So you might find yourself remembering more. God likes to stir up revelation while you're sleeping because your mind is at rest, right? You're not trying to create something or make something happen. So enjoy this month of tranquility and peace. So sometimes God will give you a memory in a dream. It's not always vision, right? Sometimes it can be memories. And I really believe that when he does that, he's bringing something to the surface to heal. And God is so merciful that he wants to walk in that and heal you. And I've discovered that to me, emotional healing is so much deeper and even more important than physical healing, right? It's all part of the process, but the emotional healing is the deep work that God wants to do in your heart, in your spirit, in your mind. Because our mindset creates everything we experience. It's everything. So, Kislev is also the month that Hanukkah begins. It's the only holiday on the Jewish calendar that connects 2 months. So it begins in this month and it ends in the month of Tevet. And this is so great because in the message of Hanukkah is that in the midst of destruction, there is mercy. So no matter what aspect of destruction you might be dealing with, Whether it's external or internal or physical or spiritual, God has a way to impart mercy and to build your future. That's always his goal, right? And so we've also learned that when something feels like it's being deconstructed, there is purpose in that. And that is because God needs to sometimes deconstruct. Sometimes things need to be deconstructed in order for us to plant. We always say, like, plant in new seed. You have to dig out the old before you can plant in new. And God's grace is sufficient, it is everything. And his love is everlasting, forever. So I want to go, as we're focusing on this idea that even in destruction, there will be mercy and grace. And what comes with that is this idea of hope. And so think about this question: what rises up on you in you when you think, is hope reasonable? Like, is it smart for me to be hopeful? Where has that taken me before in my past? Can I afford it? Seriously, can I afford to have hope? Many people with a history of trauma find it difficult to have hope and to believe in something again and get disappointed again. And we can feel stuck in a place of hopelessness about our own healing or about anything changing, right? It's this sense that nothing significant is really going to change for me, and that this present ordering of life, of my life, is the way things are. It's just the way things are going to be. And I got some incredible insight from Adam Young, this guy that I've been following now for the last couple months, but really a lot these last few weeks. And I've been learning a lot. I actually did a one-day workshop from him a couple weeks ago that was so inspiring to me. And really, I love plugging into things like that because it really helps catapult me forward. Because sometimes my mind tries to figure out things before, instead of, like, just letting God. And so I can get overwhelmed. So I need to plug in. And that helps me go, okay, God's the one that's going to do this. God's the one that's going to pull all this together. And so good. But I love that he brings about this idea of, is hope reasonable? And so he's drawing from the book of Jeremiah. And in this, he's asking, what if God is free to create a new beginning in your life that is not connected to your present circumstances? How can I think differently about hope and about hopelessness? And if we can expect God to do anything genuinely new in our lives, and sometimes we can feel stuck and in despair in a particular area of our life, maybe that this will never change. Maybe it's more than one area. And if there is a trauma that has inflicted a wound upon us, which most of us have experienced in our lifetimes, it can feel incurable. It can feel a little bit like my wound is beyond help, or I am beyond healing. And it's interesting because he brings this alignment, that this is actually precisely the place where God's people found themselves in Jeremiah 30. And it's pretty astonishing because God says to them, your wound is incurable. What? Yeah. God is saying your injury is beyond healing. Okay. So what is God saying? And don't worry, we're going to unpack this. But do you sometimes feel that, like you're beyond it? We have come to understand through our own exploration and our own healing that our present day brokenness, or our present day things that we're fighting, right, is linked to our past experiences in life. And we've learned that we can heal through our stories, through understanding the story of who we are, being able to process that in a healthy way. We can and will and do find healing. And sometimes, even in the healing process, it can make you feel like you're beyond repair. Because in the process, you can discover, like, things like that we're insecurely attached to people. We can start discovering, oh, so this is my part. This is what I need to kind of like heal. What do we do about that? Like we talked about our own Oh, our attachment styles, and we're gonna talk a lot more of that about that over the next month. But how do we change our styles of attaching when we have different ways that maybe are not healthy? And how do we change that? How do we understand our triggers and our reactions? Our understanding our attachment styles helps to do that a lot. And after we do the work, even healing and deliverance, is when we start to understand our habits of connection. And that's truly where we can change. We can understand it and change those habits of connection. And it's where we will experience change in our presence, and especially with our relationships, and foundationally within yourself, because it's in yourself is where it begins. It's about integrating these all of these ways of coping, is integrating that so that we can come and bring that integrated wholeness into our relationships, as a wife, as a mother, as a friend, as a daughter, whatever your role is. If you're a man, all of those roles, as a husband, as a father, as a brother, right, as a son, as a friend, all of those things. So this is so, so powerful. But there is hope. I want to tell you that there is hope. There is, um, it can feel like there is no hope because this is just who you are. This is how you were wired. This is how you were made. Because doing healing work can bring up awareness that what was lacking and what those consequences are today might not be able to be changed. But that is a lie. That is a lie from the very pit. So, have you ever been triggered by something and had your nervous system respond? Your nervous system is activated and you can feel something rising up, your heart rate maybe, or you literally get what you want to throw up. You can feel it in your stomach or in your soul. You can feel that way. Hi. Your nervous system is activated and it's hard to self regulate. And there are times when I can be triggered by something and my mind can say, not a big deal, move on, which it is a big deal if you're being triggered. But when your nervous system is engaged and you're activated, there's no talking it out of it, right? And I believe God is so merciful in that, because he's bringing to your attention that there's something that needs to be healed. And it's not on you. God wants to partner with you in this process. So it can feel like you're going backwards sometimes in your healing, that you're triggered, but it's not true. It is in your healing that you're going to be brought into, you're going to have these situations arise. It's like when you pray for patience, God's not just going to give you patience. He's going to give you the person in front of you that drives 10 miles an hour so you can practice patience, because those habits of how we respond emotionally, God doesn't just change those. He partners with us, right? But he doesn't do things in the human arena by himself like that. That's where he wants to call, that's where he brings that attention to you. And we have to lean on him, right? So it's so interesting because according to this idea that this is where the Israelites were, imagine where they were during the exile. They were 100% filled with hopelessness that things were ever going to change, and that they were in despair. How do you believe things are going to get better when you have lost everything and you have lived generations in slavery and bondage? When you're there, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to have an anticipation that God is about to heal, initiate healing work, right? In our life. Can you imagine the exile of Israel? Because this was the defining event of the Old Testament. It's the most defining event. Most of the writings refer to this, and God even reordered the calendar to reflect this time, this deliverance. It's incredible. So as we count the months, we do it from the perspective that we are that many months out from when we got our freedom. We're in the 9th month. We're 9 months away from God bringing us out. How powerful is that? He wants you to understand this profound truth. And doesn't mean you won't struggle, right? But to know that that's the foundation. The foundation is that. So the Jews believed in the depths of their being that God had covenanted with them to always protect their city and their temple, and that these would never be conquered. They would never be physically conquered. And it gave them an incredible sense of security. And even though they were in the midst of a very violent world, they believed God would never let them be conquered. So you may be wondering, why on earth would God let his people be conquered by the Babylonians? Why did Jerusalem fall and the temple was destroyed? Well, all of the prophetic books like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Hosea, they explained the reason for the fall of Israel and the exile of his people was because they had profoundly disobeyed the Torah, God's law. And they had built a society that was oppressive, exploitive. They were doing horrendous things. They were idolatrous in every way. And Jeremiah is speaking to them and he's telling them, your wound is incurable. And this was the condition of Israel in exile. And I'd like to suggest that this can feel like the condition, a felt condition of where many of us who have experienced trauma are, right? That somehow we can be beyond, even though we've tried a lot of things, a lot of healings, things don't really always seem to fully go away. And it's not to say that the wounding is your fault. That's not the connection that this story of the Israelites is about. But it's about the connection of the place that we find ourselves is similar to where God's people found themselves after their city was burned down and they were exiled. You can find yourself in a state of barrenness, in a state of a metaphor of barrenness is the inability to create life and goodness and healing on your own by yourself. It's a metaphor for hopelessness. Do you feel that way? Do you feel hopeless that anything truly new can happen in your life? So let's go further in Jeremiah because something unbelievable happens in God's heart. So he just said, your wound is incurable and there is no remedy, no one to plead your cause. All your allies have left you, right? In verse 12. But now in verse 17, he says this, but I will restore you. He says, I'm going to restore you to health and heal your wounds. So what the heck, right? What is this? In 12, he's telling us our wound is incurable, but in 17, he's saying, but I'm going to restore you. So which is it? So this text holds together two truths that we don't tend to hold together, that we don't tend to put together, because it claims that you can have an incurable wound, and it also claims that it can be healed. So this is so powerful because I've just really come to understand that it is in understanding that our wound is incurable on our own. There's nothing we can do to cure this. It acknowledges the severity of the wound and that there also is actually possibility of healing. God is not denying the severity of the wound, but he is saying he will heal it. There is a man named Walter Brueggemann that wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination. And he says this, that I'm going to actually quote him about 3 times in the next couple minutes. So anytime I'm doing a quote, it's from him. Amazing. And he says, the one who is utterly beyond healing will be healed. Right? So all of Jeremiah 30 and 33 is incredible. And he's speaking words into Israel's dire situation. He is proclaiming that God is interested in bringing a newness into the life of barren Israel, even when there's no evidence of that. Even when there's no evidence that newness is a reasonable possibility. When everything has been destroyed or when it feels like there's nothing left, it's unreasonable to think that there's hope, that God is going to resurrect something, right? But God is free to create newness amidst chaos and despair. In fact, God is committed to that. He's committed to creating that newness. And this is where we're confronted with that question. This is where you are confronted with that question for yourself. Is it reasonable to hope? And I learned that we have intellectual categories. Isn't that interesting? And it confronts us with a new intellectual category, which is a category of promise. Do you believe the promise of God is reasonable? So, what comes up for you when you ask yourself, is it reasonable to hope? Is it reasonable to believe in the promise of God? Can you trust the promise of God to create newness in your life, especially when you only see hopelessness right now? If anything is coming up, write it down, share it with us. So, after the Enlightenment, our society and our culture teaches that change is only possible by what we can do by ourselves. Science decided a long time ago that anything that happened to our brain could not be changed. Kind of you're stuck with it. You're stuck with whatever there is. And our imagination stopped being able to conceive of God intervening in a hopeless situation and creating something new. We can mostly see only the things that we can create. Science and society has believed for decades that what is possible is only what humans can do by themselves. So, this category of promise that God will intervene is excluded for most rational and thoughtful people. Luckily, we are not rational people, right? We are irrational in trusting in God because that is not like a rational thing, right? How do you move across country because you feel the Spirit is leading you there? That is not rational thought, right? But it's so beyond that. It's so much more powerful than that. Okay, so even sadly, even in most churches, this is irrational. Um, and it's the undercurrent of their belief. But in Jeremiah 30 through 33, it's a contradiction to that. And it proclaims that God is committed. In fact, he's relentlessly committed to creating a newness precisely in the moment when we can't get ourselves out of our stuckness. Okay, so here's another quote. The promises of God require us to redefine the categories through which we sort out what is possible and what is not possible. So think about that. You have categories. Your mind has created categories of what is possible and what is not possible. And that is a really good thing to think about. What is your mind deemed possible? And what has it deemed impossible? Very, very interesting. So, what if what is possible for you in this life is too small or too limited? Brigham points out that Jeremiah urges the people not to trust in what the world calls possible because this actually leads to despair because it's not how God designed you. God put in you a heart that is meant to be in alignment with Him, where everything is possible. So, part of our despair is being put in a box, in a society, in a world that shuts that off, that shuts that down. And so, Jeremiah is urging the people to trust instead in the impossibilities which exist first on God's lips. So, what is something being disrupted for you right now? Do you have space in your imagination for something new to happen in your life? And not because you make it happen, but because you are open and believing that God is going to initiate something new. I loved how he broke this down because much of our lives, we believe change and healing is derived from our present state and circumstances. And the kingdom of evil is committed to shrinking your imagination. It wants you to believe that the best you can imagine, oh, listen to this. The best you can imagine is rearranging what exists already. We have lost belief in the possibility of God to do something new. So, what is required for God to do something new in your life? How can something new come into your life? It is the act of creation. Do you think the creator has stopped creating? In the Old Testament, the prophets called on Israel to do three things. And if you listen, you will find direction for yourself today. So, the first thing the prophets called the people to do was to break through their denial by naming the reality of their wounds. It was to acknowledge that the wound was incurable, and it is incurable on your own. To be honest about the fact that the temple had been destroyed and to grieve those wounds. Number two was to grieve those wounds. The prophets called on Israel to process through the losses, to understand, to not be in shock about where you are. You have to assess where you are and grieve that. Grieve that. And if you have any questions on how to do that, stick around, plug in. We have so much to share on that. So, three, the number third is to risk imagining a newness that is underived from their present circumstances and the present realities of their lives. So, how do we name the reality of our wounds? We have to break through the denial that it wasn't that bad, that it really happened and it really affected you. That's powerful. That's very powerful. How do we grieve? It's the ultimate acknowledgement of what was is true, that things happened that affected you. And it's normal and natural to be sad about that, to grieve that. And finally, how do you risk imagining a newness that is not connected to your current situation? Really believing that a creator can still create and risk believing that he will. So we say underived, right? That what is possible is not derived from your current situation. So what underived means is that it is not built from the existing pieces of my life. It means it is not about reordering or rearranging of what I already have. It requires an act of creation. And this is not, the word create in this is not something humans can create. This is the place that you are in the way that things are right now. And there is a thought that claims that this is the final ordering of your life, that nothing is ever really going to change. But if the creator is free to create something new, can you feel hope rise in your heart? And you might even see, it reminds me of the wheat and the tares, right? Something rising, hope is rising up, and there's still a little voice that's saying it's foolish to hope. But creation is intrinsic in all of us. Our foundation is built on all the ways God created things out of seemingly barren and impossible situations. God spoke to the Israelites when they were slaves in Egypt, and a new community came to exist. And even though their present state was slavery, God was bringing them into something completely new that they had nothing to compare it to, no understanding. And here's another quote. This is amazing. Hope is not a late tacked on hypothesis to serve a crisis. Think about that. It is not a late tacked on hypothesis to serve a crisis, but rather hope is the primal dimension of every member of this community. He is saying it's absolutely reasonable to hope because newness is written into our collective stories. It's written into it. God initiates freely to do something new. So the job of the prophets was to remind the people of all that God had already done and to give people hope when they felt like it was just going to be more of the same. So here's this amazing quote. And I might repeat this twice because this was one of those wow. Okay, so to imagine a new gift given from the outside, like right from something that I don't create or make happen, right? So to imagine a new gift given from the outside violates our reason. It's short of genuine newness. Life becomes a dissatisfied coping, a grudging trust, and a managing that dares never to ask for much. Oh, wow. I've read this. And in the reading of this again, do you feel like your life can be lived in a dissatisfied coping, a grudging trust, and a managing, like you're just managing, like you're rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? That's not what it's meant to do. And in that space and in that place, we live in a place that never dares to ask for much. I'm not going to believe in much. I'm not even going to ask for much. That is a very sad place to be. And it is nothing like what God intended the life for you to have, especially in the freedom of Christ. But God sees the misery of his people, and he has moved to compassion, and he has moved to act. He is moved to bring something new. Hope is reasonable. Ultimately, because of the resurrection, it is so reasonable. So a new act of creation was performed by God, who is free to act in light of despair. So as you risk hoping that God might do something new in the desperate and barren places of your life, know that we are in this together. And it is not lost on me that this month is the month about stepping into a higher level of trust. It is the month of the rainbow. It is the month of the promise, the covenanted promise. And we can trust in that. And we must put to death anything that is stopping us from connecting to that trust. So happy Thanksgiving and happy Kislev. It's an honor to walk in this journey as we go from strength to strength together. So with that said, enjoy your day. Enjoy this day, this first day of a new month. It's a day of rest too. It is a Sabbath day as we bring this day and make it awesome. Bring it into alignment with God and make it holy as he wants and desires to bless the rest of the month. So I'm so excited. Shabbat shalom, you guys.